I'd like to call this third meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. This meeting is being televised, and today we're consider committee business and continue consideration of our routine motions. Just before I make introductory remarks, just remind people at the end of the last meeting, Mr. Christofferson had the floor, and I will shortly yield to him after a couple of opening comments here. And at the end of the meeting, as you know, committee's work is to deal with one of the high priorities is government business, and you did get a letter about some government business, which I'll mention at the end of the meeting. So hopefully it'll be for future meetings. I had a chat with Mr. Christofferson on the weekend, and we felt that it would be good if we could, before we proceeded back to him having the floor on the motion we were discussing, to facilitate the rest of Parliament doing its work, if we went to the very last motion on routine business first, which is the delegation of authority to the whips to appoint all the other committees. So if that's okay with Mr. Christofferson?
Chair, that accurately reflects our discussion, and yes, I do defer for the motion to be placed, and would hope that I would get the floor back after we've done that. Thank you.
Sure, as agreed. So, Mr. Chan.
Given Mr. Christofferson's, we're fine on the government side to proceed in that manner. Could we then perhaps move that particular motion, if that's agreed, to all committee members?
Are you you're moving the motion?
I am moving the motion. I'll read out the motion for the record, please. This deals with the delegation of authority to whips. I so move that the three whips be delegated the authority to act as the striking committee pursuant to Standing Orders 103, 113, and 114, and that they be authorized to present to the chair in a report signed by all three whips or their representatives their unanimous recommendations for presentation to the House on behalf of the committee.
Discussion. These are routine motions. Hopefully a lot of them will go through quickly. So I'll call the vote. Those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. So we will now give the floor to Mr. Christofferson, and we will turn to the motion we were dealing with on the subcommittee, which was the routine motion number 2 on your packages, I believe. David.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
And we're speaking to the amendment that you made.
Right. Yes, of course. Well, thanks very much, and I'm glad we were able to get a little bit of business done, because I did say I wasn't deliberately trying. My sole purpose was just to delay things. I have, I think, a relevant point. I'm hoping that the government's had a bit of a change of heart, given that, again, this really doesn't even need to be an issue. It's both nothing and big at the same time. The situation is this. We're talking about our committee, which is the only body that can make a decision. We create a steering committee, sometimes called a subcommittee on some committees, but we'll call it a steering committee here. And the sole purpose of the steering committee is to make the business of the committee move more efficiently and more quickly. At the steering committee, we'll deal with things like what order of witnesses will we agree on? What time frame will we set aside for public hearings versus going in camera? In other words, what we really do is kind of map out the work plan and the details. You know the old expression, the kind of letter you get when a committee writes it? Well, this is the same sort of thing. There's so much detail that for all of us to do it just bogs us down, takes forever. So you leave those kind of things with the steering committee. Now, here's the thing, Chair. Here's the thing. And this is why I said at the outset that only PROC as a committee can make decisions. The steering committee or subcommittee is not a decision-making body. Whether or not we agree with the voting or consensus issue that I'm raising, at the end of the day, even if there's a voting system, which is what I'm arguing we shouldn't have at that level, even if we have that, that committee can't make a decision to order coffee. They have no authority to make any decisions. Any recommendation that's made, when it's a consensus model, which is what I'm pushing for, if there's unanimity between the 3 representatives of the 3 parties at the steering committee, and there's unanimity, that recommendation goes to the committee. And normally it comes and everybody's just fine with it because their representative has looked at it. Now there's some cases where that's a little different, but for the most part, when there's a unanimous recommendation comes from the steering committee, in fact, usually the entire report is accepted in terms of the recommendations made, because each of us knows that our representative was there speaking on behalf of our vested interests as individual caucuses, at the same time working for the betterment of the entire committee. Now that works best when it's consensus. And the other rule is, if you don't have unanimity, nothing goes to the committee. There's no recommendation. There's no politics. There's nothing to defeat. If there's no unanimity, it comes directly to the committee and just as if it had bypassed the steering committee. That's the impact it has. It goes into the committee, it's discussed. If there isn't unanimity, then it comes right to this committee, acting as if it never went to the steering committee. So the only thing the steering committee does is try to come to agreement on the details of the business we do. Now, again, if it was the Conservatives, with the greatest of respect, I wouldn't even try to make this argument, because on the committee that I chaired in the last Parliament, they eliminated the steering committee. So there was no point in talking about the minutiae of the details of a committee that the government of the day has just stood there, folded their arms, and says, there shall not be. And that was the end of that. But we know how well that attitude went over after enough years, culminating in the election we just had, culminating in the election of the new government, with a new mandate and a new vision. And part of what this government promised, and this is the only reason I'm making this an issue, is one of our jobs as the opposition is to hold the government accountable. And I understand that rules aren't very sexy and they're not very appealing, but I've been around long enough to know that the rules we agree to today, when we get into crisis down the road and we go into our various corners and we're having pitched political battles, which doesn't happen all the time on this committee, but happens from time to time on every committee. And when that happens, we'll thrash it out. But there's one thing we know for sure, Chair, no matter how controversial the issues are here, the government wins every vote 10 times out of 10. Every vote, they win. I've been in a majority government. It's a great feeling. You walk into a meeting in the House, and every vote you know you're going to win, no matter what. So this is a government that ran on a platform that said, we're going to be different at committees. We really like the mothership, the Westminster model, and the way they do committees. And people who go there and watch it say that it's difficult to tell the opposition members from the government members. That means one of two things. Either you're in a democracy where there is very little democracy and everything is decided from on high and the opposition has no power or doesn't want power, but you do not have a dynamic democracy, and most of us who have been here for a while have been to those countries, and we know firsthand what that looks like. So it's either that situation when you can't tell who's government and who's opposition, it's either that where there's a stranglehold on everything, and I won't name countries, but we could all put titles to that thought, or they're actually functioning in a way that means they're there as parliamentarians and their partisan membership is secondary to trying to do the work of the committee. And what they do, very successfully compared to us, is try to remove some of the partisanship that's in the House, and when they get at committee, they act as parliamentarians. And so when everybody is kind of focused the same way on an issue or a problem, if you're just observing, it's hard to tell who's the government, who's the opposition. That's a good thing. Most of our committees, you come walking in, within 3 minutes, you know who's government, who's opposition, because our speeches can and often are laced with partisanship. So the government ran on a platform of saying, we don't like that. That's not the kind of democracy we want. We don't think that reflects the values of Canadians. And I'll say to the government, there were an awful lot of us in the NDP that shared that sentiment. So, the government got elected. Okay, the dog chased the car and the dog caught the car. Now what? Well, so far, it's same old, same old. We came here to this meeting, the first meeting we had, after the government ran on a platform of openness, transparency, new independence, and certainly removing parliamentary secretaries from the chokehold that they had over the government majority. So we walk in here on the first day, and what do we see? We see Mr. Lamoureux, who I quite like. I've served with him for quite some time now. But this is not about him personally. But Mr. Lamoureux, as the parliamentary secretary, was sitting right there. Excuse me. Right there, where Tom Lukiski used to sit, who used to be the parliamentary secretary to the government House Leader. And it was that very system that this government ran on that they said they were going to change. First meeting. They just completely threw everything they said in the election out the window and just went back to normal. We'll do it just the way the Conservatives did. So we called him on it. I called him on it. And he moved down a couple of seats. And we called him on it again. He's moved down a couple of more seats, so we're making gains, getting closer to the door. But he's still here. And at that first meeting, the Blues will show that he spoke probably, my estimate, 80 to 90% of the time, which used to be the problem. The parliamentary secretary would roll in here, tell the government members what the marching orders are from on high that day, and regardless of what debate we had, that was the way the vote went. And that exact thing is what the government said they were going to change. That they're going to give committees more independence, that they're going to let go of some of the power that the previous government corralled. Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. Part of the reason why the government was elected and got as many seats as they did. So now we're talking about the steering committee in that context, and all I'm suggesting and asking and putting forward is that because remember, there's no set rule. Most committees go by consensus. I don't know any steering committee where they actually take votes, which is the point. And the government says, well, we won't do it very often, and we're not looking to do that. No. First of all, I started out negotiating collective agreements 40 years ago and been in politics ever since, and that stuff's not going to wash, because once we get into our corners and fighting on partisanship, those rules are what we have to live by, and the government stands by every letter of them in order to maintain the control they want. So, as a sign of good faith, and I really thought this was an easy one. I thought I was handing Mr. Lamoureux a ball that he would pick up and run with all over the bloody court, because he could say, oh, we're honoring our commitments, and Mr. Christopherson's putting the pressure on us, but make no mistake, we want to do these things, and we're willing to do that, and blah, 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 blah. And I was worried that I had given him all that. And instead, he digs in. In fact, one of his members even tried to shut me down. Talk about shades of the previous government. So, back to the point. The steering committee, and here's the thing, if people, and it's, if you don't live inside this stuff every day, it sounds like, what the heck, you're just going on and trying to take up time. And I accept that that's some of the criticisms, fair enough. It's not true, but it's a fair criticism that can be made. So what happens if you have that voting dynamic? A number of things, Chair, and you've been around a long time, back now, but you were here before, you know how this place works. That if you're going by vote, well, now we're into the partisan parliamentary games that happen. They're all legal, but they're games. such as waiting until somebody leaves the room so that you can move a motion. Now, that sort of thing even happens in the House, where House leaders and whips are keeping an eye on who's in the House and who isn't, and can they gain an advantage and grab control of the House, and it's been done. And if you're in a committee where voting matters, then it also depends on winning that vote, because now you've got a positive motion going forward. And once you introduce voting into the dynamic of a meeting room, again, those of us who have been doing this kind of thing, it doesn't have to be politics. Anybody engaged in community work who understands the difference between working towards something on a consensus basis versus a voting decision. Now remember, all of this is in the context that this committee is the only body that can make decisions, and that the government wins these votes 10 times out of 10. So all we're asking is, let's remove that irritant, and that really is all it is, from our steering and subcommittees, and acknowledge that they are consensus. And if there isn't unanimity on an issue, it won't go forward to the committee with a recommendation, and if there is, it does. Nice and simple. The government, this is the thing I'm having trouble with, Chair. What I'm speaking to means the government gives up nothing, really, especially when they argue they're never going to use the voting. And since it can't be a decision-making body, we're not taking, it'd be hard to measure the amount of power that's being taken. Power is not the right word. Influence, nuance, advantage. But it's not power, because that body doesn't make decisions. Even when they're unanimous, they only are recommendations. The subcommittee cannot make decisions for this group. So I come back again to the fact that this was an easy one. And my problem, Chair, looking forward, as somebody who's been around here for a bit, is if they're not willing to loosen up on things that really don't even matter, where there isn't any real power to give, it's more of a nuisance, a nuance, an influence, call it what you will. If they won't even give that up, then how sincere is the government really in terms of doing things different from the last Parliament? Because so far, all I see is same old, same old. Nothing has changed. The faces have changed. But I'm still sitting here facing a majority, with the parliamentary secretary possibly still calling the shots. And on the first real attempt to modify anything, a tiny little thing like this, the government's digging in their heels, and oh, no, we can't do that. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can get elected on sunny ways, but that alone isn't going to carry the day. We got to see some change. And I'm not getting any indication. I was kibitzing with Mr. Lamoureux in the House yesterday, hoping that would provide him a chance to come over and say, by the way, Dave, we're not going to make an issue out of that other thing. I said, no, that didn't happen. So unless I'm hearing something different, which I'm getting no indication the government's going to change, it doesn't look like they're going to acquiesce on this. And if they're not going to give on this, then a whole lot of Canadians need to understand that the government is serious about parliamentary change only when it suits them, which of course is the antithesis of the point. The point is to try and make this less partisan. So here we are. I thought I was rather generous. Gave Mr. Lamoureux a Christmas gift when I identified to him what he was giving me as I saw it unfolding. And I said, Mr. Lamoureux, paraphrasing myself, why are you doing this? I'm going to keep talking about this to the end of the meeting. That means it's going to carry over into the Christmas, New Year's break. That means when there's a slow news day, somebody's going to pick up that little thread and say, oh, here's something interesting. I got to give my editor something today. Here's something that's legitimate. It's real, and it's not that big, but it's something. And sure enough, that's what happened. Now, why, and I repeat myself from last year, why on earth the government wants to take a hit on one of their key signature pieces, which was democratic reform, And especially, the government said, in the area of committees. We want them to be more independent, less under the control of the PMO, less partisanship, more camaraderie, more working together, more acting as parliamentarians rather than partisans. And sure enough, it wasn't big, but it was big enough. And so they took this hit, and they're continuing to take this hit. And every time they stand up and brag about their other democratic reforms, don't think that this isn't going to come back. And this is only one, because my sense is this government's not prepared to be serious about change. So it's going to be drip, 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 and the government can make their big headline announcements, and then it's going to be drip, drip, drip. At the end of 4 years, if this continues, there's going to be a whole lot of Canadians saying, wait a minute, what happened to all that change that they talked about? What happened about injecting new life and dynamism into our democracy and into our House of Commons, particularly, the government, remember the government said particularly in the area of committees. So, I don't understand it from a procedural point of view. I don't understand it from a reform point of view. I don't understand it from an efficiency point of view, and I certainly don't understand it from a partisan point of view. Especially when the government says, well, we really don't want to use voting. But then why are you maintaining that the voting system even exists there? Why? Why? There's only one answer. I believe Mr. Chan referred to it, I could be right, I stand to be corrected, but I think made a reference to, well, there may be times. Okay, here we go. Oh, there may be times. And that's why these things matter now, because we get one kick at this in 4 years. Once. Some committee rules get changed, Chair, as you know, over the course of Parliament, but for the most part, committee rules, once they're set, that's what you live by. And that's why I'm making an issue out of this now, because it's the only chance we have. So I would be interested, before I completely relinquish the floor, Chair, to see if there's a response from the government, because if they're willing to say they agree, then I don't need to go on. I don't need to summarize. And if they aren't, then I will move on to summarize, because I'm not going to die on this political hill. From a partisan point of view, we've already gotten more from this than anyone would have any right to expect, because of the government's pig-headedness. But anyway, Chair, with that understanding that I still have the floor, I would offer colleagues on the government side a chance to respond to what I've said so far, and I'd still like a chance to have the floor back.
Well, you can't automatically have the floor, but
well, I'll put myself on the list after I give it, which seems kind of silly, but
looks like
if nobody else takes the floor, there's nobody to get after.
You're going to be the only one on the list anyway, so is there...
Just say yes.
Anyone? Just while we're waiting for Jamie, welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
And anyone that wasn't at the last meeting, I'm just going to read into the record what we're debating. This is the second routine motion, Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. Motion amendment moved December 10th, 2015. It was moved by Mr. Arnold that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of the chair, 2 vice chairs, and 2 government members. And then there was an amendment, which we're debating now, moved by Mr. Christofferson, that the motion be amended by replacing the words 2 government members with the following 1 government member. So is there someone that would like to speak? Is you?
Oh, okay. I'm Mr. Arnold. Sure. I don't even like being called Mr.
Is someone?
I'm just saying that maybe that should have read, because the English and French is inconsistent. It should probably just say Mr. Chan.
You addressed him as Mr. Arnold. It should say Mr. Chan.
Mr.
Yeah, because what you read into the record.
Yeah, it says Mr. Chan.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Moved by Mr. Chan. Sorry, the minutes were.
Yeah.
Incorrect.
Inaccurate.
Was there someone other than Mr. Christopherson that wanted to speak? Or we'll just carry on? Okay, might as well carry on until someone approaches me.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to the end, Chair. I said this wasn't an exercise in trying to deliberately hold things up, and it wasn't. But it is interesting that on the motion that we're talking about how many government members, and quite frankly, if it was consensus, fill your boots, bring as many as you want. The whole idea is just to come to some agreement on things. But this matters because now they're getting into the voting aspect. So I've been around and around on this, Chair. I've made my point, certainly more than I thought I would end up. But it's clear. I mean, I got to say, Chair, this is so much like dealing with the last government. I mean, this government wants to say they're different, and I know that they, in their hearts, they may be. But as Proc has unfolded, this is just like Toryland. This is just exactly the way the last government ran things. And I see members shaking their head. No, I understand how you feel. But the fact of the matter is that those of us that were here last time know that this is a repeat of the way, and on this first issue, besides, it'd be nice to see the member jump in. She got a lot of body language. Well, Mr. Lambrou not letting you speak. I thought the whole idea was everybody gets their say. And I see this body language, and you just got so much to give, but there's no. I used to watch that. I feel for you. I understand what that's like. I've seen it with some of my colleagues in the last government. They were itching to speak. They wanted to bring democracy and oxygen to the discussion, but they were stifled. Much like what we see here, where the parliamentary secretary keeps himself very busy on his BlackBerry and his notes and keeps his head down and tries not to make eye contact. And the rest of the members sitting there kind of wondering, why are we in this mess? And I get a sense would like to say something, but they aren't. And what does that look like? Well, that's exactly the way it was before. So words alone don't change things, my friends. If you want to change things, you got to change them. And the first opportunity, the very first and likely the easiest opportunity this government would ever have to indicate they really do want to do things different and aren't interested in the PMO having their throat grip on every committee, this was their chance. And there they sit, quiet, just like the Conservatives used to, waiting for their moment to use their majority vote to ram through what they want to do. Now, how that is different and sunny ways and openness escapes me. And I will be very interested to see where and how this government is actually going to deliver on making committees more independent, more transparent, and less partisan. I'm anxious to see where that is going to be, because this is the easiest one the government's going to get, and they have no interest. I'm done.
Are there any other speakers to the amendment? We ready for the vote? All in recorded vote on the amendment. I'll read the amendment just so we know what we're voting on. Moved by Mr. Christopherson that the motion be amended by replacing the words "two government members" with the following "one government member." Recorded vote. So do I just?
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, Ms. Vandebel?
No.
Oh, you'll
I
do
will
it?
take care of
Okay, the clerk will call out names.
Mr. Christopherson? Yes. Mr. Richards? Yes. Mr. Reid? Mr. Schnell? Yes. Mr. Chan? Mr. Graham? Madame Petitpas-Taylor?
No.
Ms. Sahota? Ms. Vandenveld?
So 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 noes. So the amendment is defeated.
Okay, the amendment was defeated, so now we'll go to the motion itself. And any debate on the motion itself? Ready for the vote? Moved by Mr. Chan that the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and be comprised of the chair, 2 vice chairs, and 2 government members. All in favor? Okay, recorded vote.
I vote yes.
Mr. Chan? Mr. Graham? Yes. Madame Petitpas-Taylor? Ms. Sahota? Ms. Vandenbeld? Mr. Richards? Yes. Mr. Scott? Mr. Reid? My apologies.
Sorry, informality.
Mr. Christopherson? Mr. Schnell?
Okay, that motion is carried. So we'll go on to the third routine motion, which, because of name changes, has to be. Yep,
I seek your guidance. I wish to place a motion regarding in-camera business and would ask your guidance through the clerk where best to introduce that.
Sounds like this is new.
Number 9 deals with in-camera.
Under motion 9, when we get to that, it's related to in-camera.
Mine aren't numbered. What's the 9 is? What's the heading?
Access to in-camera meetings.
Yeah, I wondered, but because it was only access, I didn't want to get caught on a narrowness. So you'll allow me to make a motion at that time regarding in-camera meetings? Just place the motion.
If this is totally new, can we just do that at the end of the routine motions here?
If you want. I mean, I just want to find an appropriate place for it.
Okay. We'll do the ones we normally do, and then we'll do yours at the end. Okay.
Sure.
Could someone move the motion?
I'll move number 3.
David.
Subcommittee on Private Members' Business that pursuant to Standing Order 9111, the Subcommittee on Private Members' Business be composed of 1 member from each recognized party and a chair from the government party, and that Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor be appointed chair of the subcommittee.
Debate. Ready for the vote? All in favor? Oh, sorry. Oh, sure. Do you read it again?
Sure. That pursuant to Standing Order 91.1 Bracket 1, the Subcommittee on Private Members' Business be composed of 1 member from each recognized party and a chair from the government party, and that Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor be appointed chair of the subcommittee.
Mr. Reid.
Are we having campaign speeches from the candidates for the chairmanship?
Madame Petit, did you want to give a campaign speech?
Good morning.
I guess not. Ready for the vote? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Next motion, routine related to quorum. Does someone want to move a motion?
I move that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive and publish evidence when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 3 members are present, including 1 member of the opposition and 1 member of the government.
Debate. Mr. Christopherson.
Yeah, Chair, no problem with it as far as it goes. The only thing I would ask is if we could amend it either through friendly amendment or a proper amendment, that it, rather than just 1 member of the opposition, it be 1 member of the recognized parties in opposition, or words to that effect. In other words, we're suggesting that there are 3 recognized parties and a number of independents who belong to other parties. Under this, the way it is, both of the other opposition recognized parties could be absent, and yet quorum would still be maintained. And I realize this points to the divides between caucuses and independents, and that's something we still have to wrestle with. Our system is still not fair to independents, but it is geared to caucuses. It is geared to recognized parties. It's the basis of our entire structure. I'm just asking if we could make sure that it's clear that when it says including one member of the opposition, that that is one from a recognized party.
Oh, sorry, wait a minute. So you want to make sure that when it's talking about opposition here, it's either the two
at least one of the,
parties.
yeah, that it's a recognized party.
It's not like an independent or something.
Exactly, that's my point, Chair.
Right.
And I understand and feel bad that it does what it does to independents, but the structure is built around caucuses, and I've got to protect the rights of my caucus.
Yeah,
but
maybe, Mr. Chair, if I could just get a comment from, or if you could solicit a comment from the clerk.
Okay.
My understanding is that all committees in the past, a quorum was government and official opposition presence. There has never been any consideration given to a third party's presence. I'm wondering if maybe through the clerk, if she can provide any indication whether or not I am right or I am wrong. My understanding is it's the official opposition, a member of the official opposition, and the member of the government party presence is what's required in order to have a quorum. So that would be something completely new that's being proposed.
yes, for clerk.
This particular motion here provides for a reduced quorum for the purpose of gathering evidence. So the committee can decide what it wants that to be composed of. The quorum for a meeting such as this is 50% plus one. But very often, as a courtesy, the chair will wait until there's representation around the table before calling the meeting to order. Does that answer the question?
So would the committee be able to function if we were to adopt Mr. Christopherson's rule if, for example, the third party representative was not at the table?
Well, as this motion reads right now, it says one member of the opposition. So it could be either of the opposition parties represented on the committee. And if I understand the amendment correctly, Mr. Christopherson would like to provide for a member of...
Officially recognized party.
Well, but it applies to members of the committee already.
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, and I hear your point. Thank you very much, Clerk, Madam Clerk. Because it really would only apply if we added one of the independents of the committee, because they're not on the committee right now. But it is not unusual for that to happen. Sometimes parties will bring someone in, and in a given situation, that one member could be there, and that could qualify. So it's not maybe as critical as I originally was thinking, but I still would like it. I think it would still be helpful if it's clear that it's a member of a recognized opposition party. If we just add, Mr. Lamoureux, through you, Chair, if I may, if we just added including one member of a recognized opposition party, if you dropped in those two words, my problems go away, and I don't think it changes anything. You can check with the clerk, but I don't think that would change a thing. It would just mean that you had to be a member of one of the three recognized parties to qualify when they're doing a count on a small group for quorum, just for the purposes of submissions.
Loved that sort of an opportunity when I was sitting in your position. The concern, and I don't know if it's a concern, we can talk about it, I guess, is that it would take, the NDP would then have to physically be present in order for us to receive tabled documents.
If I may?
So I understand.
If I may, I was suggesting just either or, but it couldn't be an independent. So if the official opposition is here and the government is here and we're not here, too bad for us.
Okay.
If you're there and we're here and the official opposition isn't here, too bad for them. What will not happen is the government and an independent and the official opposition and the third party are both left out of a meeting. That's the only point I'm making.
Yeah, I'm fine, but how could they do that? How would they substitute?
Berg? Graham.
I'll go
Berg,
Mr.
Graham.
David, too. I just want to know, from the clerk, if its members are present, is that members of parliament or members of committee?
We're talking about committee members.
If it's members of committee, it's a redundant point. If it's members of parliament, then it's more interesting.
Mr. Christofferson's making that a member of the committee on some occasions has been a member that's not of the two officially recognized opposition parties. So it could be, for instance, Elizabeth May. It could be one of the independents that's an independent, because occasionally the committee will make a motion and allow these people to be committee members. So all Mr. Christofferson is proposing is that when we have the quorum that allows an opposition member, that it has to be, the opposition member has to be one of the two official parties.
I think the point that Mr. Graham is making, though, is that they're not permanent members of this committee, so how could an independent substitute with it? You already ceding their substitution to this committee. That's my point. So that's why I think Mr. Graham's saying it's a redundant point.
So, Mr. Chan, there are occasions when the committee accepts as permanent members people that are either independents or another party that doesn't have official status, like the Bloc or the Green, and actually make them members of the committee. So that's the
subject. They can be recognized members. And the other thing, Mr. Chan, and I acknowledge that that's not as...
We're just trying to understand what you mean.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, there's no games here. It's just I'm trying to make it... sometimes, too, the opposition parties, for machination reasons with the government, will let an independent be one of their representatives. Technically, they then have a seat on there, and technically, that would give them that right. It's a small matter. I'm not going to do what I did last time on the other one. It's not that big. If you don't think it's an improvement, I'd like to hear from the official opposition, because really they can sort of be the decider for me. But I'm not going to die on this hill. I just think it's an improvement.
I think I would accept that as a friendly amendment as the mover of the motion.
Okay. Any further comments? So the motion as friendly amended will read.
Okay. I'll read it again as amended.
Okay. Yeah. Please.
Okay. That the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive and publish evidence when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 3 members are present, including 1 member of a recognized opposition party and 1 member of the government. Okay.
Mr. Reid. Yeah, Mr. Reid was speaking to the motion. It's a friendly amendment, so we're just speaking to the motion. We'll have one vote eventually, but go ahead.
Well, that creates a problem because I support the original motion, but not the amended motion. I'm not sure that procedurally there's anything I can do about that.
You could amend the motion.
Oh my goodness. Okay, but back to its original wording.
Yeah.
Well, no, Chair, the fair thing to do in light of that then is to leave the motion as a first motion, the other one as an amendment, and then Mr. Reid can vote against the amendment.
Okay, we'll do that.
Vote as he wants on the main.
So,
Agreed. Robert's rules all mixed up in my head. And
okay, so we'll have this change as an amendment, and we'll just debate the amendment now. Yeah, okay. And you're on.
So I actually don't support this, Dave. This is purely for the purpose of receiving testimony, and I can envision a situation in which there would be witness testimony of some sort that is of particular interest to members of either the Bloc Québécois or a Green MP, and is, for whatever reason, not of interest. Maybe it relates in some respect to the votability of their private member's bill or something like that. I actually can't think of a really convincing example. I'm just not sure that we should diminish their status here and their ability to come here. It affects us, doesn't affect the Liberals. In fact, if we weren't coming, and let's say for the sake of argument, Elizabeth May was to hear witness testimony, she'd have to prevail upon 2 Liberals to come in order to make the whole thing work. But I just think diminishing their status and their ability to fully participate at the same level of us is something that I'm not sure we should give up. So on that basis, I think my inclination would be to vote against this.
Mr. Christofferson.
Thanks, Chair. I have no qualms with Mr. Reid's comments, other than I didn't see it as diminishing. I acknowledge that it is recognizing the status of recognized parties. And again, that is the thing. But to say it diminishes, it's not preventing anyone from coming that otherwise could. As I understand it, Chair, any member of Parliament can come and sit at a committee meeting if they wish. They just can't speak unless they're given a spot from their party or somebody gives them a spot, and they're not allowed to vote. But any one of us can march into any committee meeting and sit down and start listening and even ask questions if our caucus agrees. So I don't see in any way that this diminishes their right. They would still have the right to come. In my view, the only difference is that if we were counting for a quorum, they wouldn't be part of that count. But it in no way diminishes their right to be there. Their status is no less than it ever was. And actually, this is a clarification more than anything. So I hear Mr. Reid's point. I have great respect for his thoughts on these kind of matters, but I would disagree when there's a suggestion that passing the amendment takes away anything from any member of Parliament. It does not. In my view, what it does is recognize the importance of caucuses and recognized parties, and that if you're going to count quorum, and you need at least one other opposition party there, it ought to be one of the two recognized parties.
Further debate on the amendment,
So,
not on the motion on the amendment. We're ready to vote. Okay. We better read out an amendment. Yes? Sorry.
Scott, if you don't mind, can you just maybe just focus on what is, I don't quite understand your concern in regards to it.
Simply this. So under the amendment, right now the way it works is this is just quorum for the purpose of getting testimony.
Right.
So in order to be able to receive testimony, you have to have either 2 government members and 1 opposition member, or 2 opposition members and 1 government member. That opposition member could be any member of the opposition. Under the amendment, that member could only be from the New Democrats or the Conservatives. So that means that you could not have the committee sit to hear testimony if both the Conservatives and the NDP didn't want that. But for the sake of argument, it might be the case that that the Greens or the Bloc wanted to have testimony, and the government thought that they were willing to go along with it. So effectively, it diminishes, to some degree, leaving it as is, not putting in the amendment, diminishes the capacity of ourselves and the New Democrats to prevent testimony from being taken. And I don't know, on the theory that in Parliament we should always default towards openness and more debate, I'm simply defaulting towards that direction.
Further comments on the amendment? Mr. Lamoureux, could you turn your microphone off, please? Any further comments on the amendment? We're ready to vote? Okay, so the amendment, who's making the amendment? Do you want to read it out just so we're clear what we're voting on for the record?
Well, the motion would be that the words, where the current motion says, including 1 member of the opposition, it would be amended, excuse me, to say, including 1 member of a recognized opposition party. So it would be the exchange of those words.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment? All opposed to the amendment? Oh my God. Oh, Jesus.
I can give you some advice on that.
Yeah.
We should probably.
Okay. I'm going to vote following convention. I'm not always going to vote following convention, but on I don't think it's worth breaking a convention of the House and committees that on this particular motion. So the convention is, as some of you have been around for a while know, that that when Speaker or Chair breaks a tie, it stays with the convention, and it stays with the status quo. The vote to not change. The status quo when we came into this meeting was that there was no rule related to the subcommittee and the quorum of the subcommittee. And so my vote to maintain that status quo is to vote no for the amendment. And the amendment is defeated. Understood? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, so now we'll go to the... Yeah, if there's no further amendments, someone could amend something that they could get majority for, but... so we'll go to the debate on the motion itself, as was originally presented by Ms. Vanderbilt. Any further debate? Ready for the question? All in favor of the motion? And passed. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this very constructive debate, actually, that we're having. And that was very interesting.
Mr. Chair, can I move the next matter?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so, Mr. Chair, this is dealing with time for opening remarks for questioning of witnesses. And originally had read that, that witnesses be given 10 minutes to take their opening statement, and that during the questioning of witnesses, the time allocated to each questioner be as follows. For the first round of questioning, 7 minutes to a representative of each party in the following order. And then, oh, sorry, I should change that. Sorry. Can I back up? For the first round of questioning, and it should read 6 minutes to a representative of each party in the following order. Conservative, Liberal, NDP, and Liberal. For the second round, 6 minutes be allocated for the following order. Liberal, Conservative, Liberal, Conservative, and then finally on the last one, 5 minutes for Conservative on the for number 4, and then create a 5th slot for the NDP for 3 minutes. Be allocated. For a total of 50 minutes.
Does anyone want that read again?
Let me read that again. My apologies.
You understand? Yeah.
I'm not even looking for an amendment, Chair. An understanding would suffice that where we have more than one witness, we may want to massage some of the opening remark times from time to time, depending. And if I might, that's the sort of work that normally the steering committee would look at and make those kind of adjustments. So with that understanding, my understanding is that there has been consultation with the parties, and as much as it sucks being back in the third party, I accept the reality of where we are, and I can live with this.
Any further discussion? Mr. Yeah.
Okay. Time for opening remarks and questioning the witnesses. That witnesses be given 10 minutes to make their opening statement, and that during the questioning of witnesses, the time allocated to each questioner be as follows. For the first round of questioning, 6 minutes to a representative of each party in the following order. Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Liberal. For the second round, 6 minutes be allocated in the following order. Liberal, Conservative, Liberal, and then for the 4th slot there, for Conservative, just 5 minutes. And then for the 5th slot, the NDP would be allocated 3 minutes.
Discussion on the motion. You turn off your microphone, Mr. Chan, please.
We have someone who switches the mics.
Richards? Yeah.
I do appreciate that attempt is being made to be reasonably fair here, although I will point out that certainly this is a bit of a change from previous, and I think there is one amendment that does need to be made here, and I'll point out why first, and then I'll explain. Well, actually, no, I'll explain the amendment that I'm suggesting. In round 2, I believe that the order should go conservative, liberal, conservative, liberal. And that would actually bring us closer to how it was in the last Parliament, where we had a fairly similar distribution amongst government, opposition, and third party. And the reason that being is that if you look at, and I don't have to tell anyone who's been around this Parliament for a while, that quite often when we look at an hour-long panel, if you've got a couple of witnesses, which is often the case, very often you're only going to get through maybe about 7 of these slots, let's say 6 or 7 of them, and therefore what would happen is those last couple of slots that you've indicated, the last one being Conservative and NDP, the last 2, those often would not actually take place. And so if you do a bit of an analysis of that, what that does is it does weight this very heavily towards the government by allowing them that first and third slot in the second round, rather than what we had done previously. If you look at the previous in this committee, this is a fair change. We would have actually, if you look at the first 6 slots in this one under the existing rules that were from the last Parliament, it would go Conservative, Liberal, and NDP, Conservative, NDP, Conservative in the old Parliament, so government. The difference is that what you've done is you've weighted the opposition speaking slots more heavily towards the end of the order, where often we don't get to. And what that would do if we take those last couple of slots off, that we would often not see happen. I mean, with those 2 slots, it would be 42 minutes of questioning, and that's often about what you would see. And therefore, what you would actually see is, as the official opposition, we would actually get almost 6% less speaking time than what our seat count would indicate we should receive. So, although I'm not opposed to the actual times that have been allocated here, I just believe that in round 2, Conservative should come first. The opposition should come first, so it should go Conservative, Liberal, Conservative, and then Liberal. And then, of course, the NDP would remain as it is currently there. And that would certainly provide a much fairer and equitable speaking slot based on the number of seats that each member of Parliament have. So that every party is being treated equally and fairly here, and each member of Parliament is being treated equally and fairly here. If the government is serious about trying to do that, I would suggest that they would be comfortable entertaining that amendment. So I'll move that amendment.
Can I just make sure people understand your amendment?
Yeah, the amendment would be that for round 2,
right,
the first slot would go to the Conservative Party, second slot would be Liberal, the third slot would be Conservative, the fourth slot would be Liberal, and then the fifth slot would be NDP, with all the times remaining the same.
So you're basically changing Liberals and Conservatives in the second round?
Exactly, correct.
Okay. Mr. Christopherson and then Mr. Chan.
Just on the off chance that Mr. Chan's going to agree, I'll let him take the floor before me.
I just have 2 very quick points. First of all, just in terms of the overall composition of time, I would simply note for the record that the government is actually ceding approximately 8% of total time to the opposition relative to its proportionality within the House of Commons. I take the point that you'd raised with respect to the risk that sometimes we don't get to the bottom order of the questions. The other point I just want to make is I understood that this was already under significant discussion between the House leaders with respect to this particular order. So that was my understanding.
Ms. Vanderbilt on the list. Mr. Christopherson.
Sorry, let me rephrase it. I should have said between the whips, that it had been informally agreed upon.
Mr. Christopherson.
Thanks, Chair. That point is very relevant. Could we get that confirmed? Because I have to say, in my briefing, I was advised that there was agreement, and the advice I was given by Our whip staff was that we would support this because there had been all-party agreement. Now, if that's not the case, then that's significant. Can we just clarify, even though we're not honor bound by that, or legally bound rather, we may be honor bound, was there buy-in by all three whips offices? Can we confirm that, yes or no? That, well, just the only thing to keep in mind, folks, these things only matter, don't matter much to us, but these whips still have to meet. And if they had an agreement and it falls apart here, it makes it very difficult for them to do their business. I'm not hearing from the official opposition any sense of where their whip was. Here's, I'll say my thing and then I'm done. And then because I don't have a horse in this race. I mean, by virtue of our results, I get screwed, and there's nothing I can do about it. We don't have enough seats to change it. So I don't have a horse in this particular debate. But here's the thing. If there was a deal is a deal is a deal. And if the deal was struck, then unless it's agreed to unravel it, that deal should hold. If there wasn't, and it's coming to us with just a recommendation as opposed to a deal, then I would argue on the side of the official opposition that there is an element of fairness, recognizing the government was gracious enough to do the 8%, recognized. But normally, we do try not to have the same party take the floor. There's usually rotation, and this does change that. So in effect, the government would get a 12-minute run on the floor, theoretically with almost the same person. They have to put somebody in for 15 seconds in between. They can get the floor back, and basically a government member gets a 12-minute run, and I don't really think that's fair. I think that in fairness, if the Liberals have gotten their lion's share, which they deserve, of the time, that at least the order should be government opposition, government opposition. So I would support the official opposition, but only in the absence of a unanimous agreement by the whips. And if there was such a thing, that should hold.
Thank you.
I'm done. Thanks.
Ms. Vanderbilt.
Yes, just on the substance of this debate, if I could just point out, in terms of individual members of this committee, right now there are 3 Conservative members of the committee, and there are 3 spots for Conservatives to ask questions. There is 1 NDP member who will then get 2 spots to ask questions, and there are 5 Liberal members of this committee and 4 spots for Liberals. So in fact, already with this proposal, one of us would not have a chance to ask questions. So I think that it's probably more than fair. So I'm not. I just wanted to point out that I think that the way that the order is quite fair as it is. In fact, probably one of us would have less time to speak in the way.
Mr. Reid?
Yeah, just in terms of fairness, I used to chair, it wasn't a committee, it was a subcommittee on international human rights. We operated by consensus, and we would have hearings, and then we would ask questions. We, like this proposal, we had opposition members at the back end, the last people to ask questions. The only way we could ever accommodate them was by letting the committee run overtime. We would actually, we met just before question period. So we'd meet from 1 to 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And in order to actually have, because questions run over. Someone's asking a question, and then the answer winds up running over. This happens all the time. So it may be different here, but we'd have someone talking about their experience being tortured, for example. You can't, as chair, you can't get them off. So they go on, and what started off being 6 minutes winds up being 7 or 8. So in order to accommodate the people at the back end asking questions, we would allow our meeting to run through the SO31s. And when I realized we were running over, I'd send the clerk out and say, could ask the people around the table, does anybody here have an SO31 we can change the order? We won't have that flexibility, I don't think, because this room, the room we're in, will frequently be booked by somebody else coming afterwards. So we won't have the ability to extend our meetings. The point I'm getting at is I think the chances the NDP will get any of its 3 minutes at the end are very low. The chances that the Conservative will get their 5 minutes are, well, not quite as low. They are, they're pretty low. I think this is a fundamentally problematic issue to be dealt with that I would say it would make more sense, quite frankly. I liked what Mr. Richards was suggesting, but I actually think the fairest thing would be if the Liberals actually have the last spot. Now, I'm not saying they should have the 3 minutes. You should still give 6 minutes, but it should be the last spot.
Before we continue debate, is there any comment from any of the parties again on the potential agreement the whips had?
If I may, on that note, my understanding is that we had presented the information to the whips and asked for feedback, and we didn't receive any negative feedback from it. The parties seemed to agree on it. Was there a formal deal per se? No, but we certainly didn't receive any negative feedback at all.
Mr. Reid?
Chair, I go to the House Leaders and Whips meeting that happens every Tuesday in the afternoon. So, you know, in the event that we deviate here from what they're doing there, or what they agree, there'd be a chance to discuss it, you know, within a very short amount of time. So I don't think we should feel ourselves absolutely bound by our, I hate to use the term honor when we're talking about party discipline, quite frankly, but by our, I don't know, our vows of obedience and chastity or whatever it is we take to our vis-a-vis our party whips. With regard to this subject, I think we should look at making some improvements here.
You want chastity in the minutes?
It's burned public. It's too late to take it back.
Mr. Christopherson, based on your earlier comment, do you have any comments on that related to the whips?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I think that's the case. There wasn't like a deal. And quite frankly, we don't have to honor that. I just wanted to make sure we knew in the context. But, you know, we're masters of our own destiny, as we like to say, at each committee. The only thing I would mention is, yeah, I mean, if we're going to be fully fair, and I very much appreciate Mr. Reid's sense of fairness, if we're going to make it so it's not a 12-minute Liberal run and recognize that the bottom two often get dropped, then the fairest way to fix that indeed would be to move the 6-minute Liberal in round 2 from the 1 slot and move it into the 5. And that way we're still maintaining. The NDP at least has a fighting chance of getting a couple of seconds of our 3 minutes, and the fairness of going government opposition is maintained. So I like that idea for self-serving reasons as well as an element of fairness.
Further debate on the... Oh, Mr. Richards.
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of respond, I guess, to Ms. Vandenbeld. I know you had sort of indicated, you know, that your feeling was that that it would shortchange one of your members. Well, I would like to point out that if you look at the proposal that I'm making in terms of an amendment compared to the original proposal, they're actually the same in terms of the number of slots that each party gets. It's only the order. And the reason the order is important, I think Mr. Reid actually did a fairly good job of explaining that. I also have had the experience of chairing a couple of parliamentary committees in the past. And I can say that and having sat on a number of others, I can say with quite a degree of certainty, and I think it would be hard for anyone who's been in Parliament to disagree with this, that when we talk about a total order here, there's 50 minutes of question and answer. And as Mr. Reid explained quite well, we know that it's very rare that you know the exact 6 minute is adhered to, and that we jump right from one to the other. There often is, and I know every chair does things a little bit differently, but I know when I was a chair, the way I tried to do it was I tried to be very strict on the members in terms of keeping them to time. But with witnesses, when they're trying to answer a question, they've only been given maybe the last 15 seconds or something of the member's time. You do try to give the witness a little bit of chance to actually answer a question. And there's always a little bit of transition when the chair transitions from one questioner to the next. And so, you know, the reality that exists here is that it very rarely, probably almost never, that those last couple of slots would be actually utilized. Therefore, what this does is weight the questions very heavily in favor of the government. And frankly, that's that's not a fairness. If you were to flip the order so that the Liberal is not first in the second round, it actually does create a fair situation. So if the government's intention here is to be fair, they would certainly accept this proposal. If not, it seems like it's another one of those smoke and mirrors kind of situations where they're trying to put something out that looks like fairness, but we all know isn't. So, you know, the number of speaking minutes that each party would receive does not change here. It's only the order, so that in the event that we don't get through the whole order, the opposition are not being shortchanged.
If Mr. Richards could read the amendment again.
Oh.
Sorry.
In a broader way, if I can, Blake. If we go back to the last series of PROC meetings, typically what would happen is you would have the government actually start debate off. The government's the one that actually begins the questioning. Here in this proposal, it's the opposition that starts the question. That is, I think, a progressive move allowing for opposition to do it. If you take a look at the last PROC series of meetings, the government always had 5 slots. So every member of the government side would be afforded the opportunity to speak. Under this new system, the government now is going to, if every member was to speak, they would have to split their time. So if you want to reflect in terms of the issue of just fairness and how it's changing, it actually works to the advantage of the official opposition. And David's right in the sense that, you know, he's guaranteed the 1 spot. It might be tough to get that 2nd spot. But at the very least, the NDP is guaranteed that their committee member will be afforded the opportunity to speak. More Conservative members are likely going to be speaking, because if you get 2 panelists speaking, chances to getting that second series of questions is going to be off and on. The Deputy Whip made reference to what has taken place. There was, you know, a sense of goodwill discussion or an offering of here it is that what we were looking at. The general feeling of the committee, from what I understand, was that there was some presentation made to the whips. The official opposition does benefit under this proposal compared to the previous way in which it was administered. The NDP will, if in fact it's 1 presenter and it's a quick go-around, they will get that second series of questions. So in that sense, there's a benefit. The party that loses out under this new structure is in fact the governing party, because no longer are they the first to question, and there's a very good chance that they're going to lose one of their questioners. That's almost an absolute. So, you know, I think that maybe if you look at it from that perspective, unless you're suggesting that we go back to the way it was, where, for example, it would be the government that would start as opposed to the official opposition. But I don't think I'm hearing that. And in that sense, I think that we should accept it, and we have that House leadership meeting later on this afternoon. We can raise the issue there, but maybe consider accepting it. But preference is to deal with it now.
Ms. Taylor.
If I may just give a bit of information with respect to the new proposed structure, just a few figures here. If we look at the past and present, or the recommendations that we're making, the Liberals in the past would have had, or the governing party would have had 56.3% of the time, and with this recommendation that we're bringing forward, we would only have 48%. The Conservatives would have been 30.3%. With this recommendation, we have they would have 34%, and the NDP would have 13% of the time, and with this proposal, they would have 17%. So that really looks at the numbers there with respect to the divisions of time that we're proposing.
Mr. Richards, and then Mr. Christopherson.
I believe what I just heard from Mr. Lamoureux, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that I'm hearing the government is saying that should we flip the order so that the government gets the first question in round 1, you would be willing to accept the amendment that we're making. In other words, and if I'm hearing correct, I would consider that a friendly amendment, so that the order would then be in round 1, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Liberal, but then in round 2, it would be Conservative, Liberal, NDP. If I'm hearing that, we could accept that as a friendly amendment.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Christopherson.
I'm going to hear from Mr. Lamoureux on that before I take the floor, Chair.
Can you just repeat that one more time? I don't know what it would look like.
So you had indicated that that should the government get the first round of questioning in round one, I think what I was hearing is that you would be willing to entertain it. So if that's the case, I would see a deal on the order being in round one, first Liberal, second Conservative, third NDP, fourth Liberal, and then in round two, it would be first Conservative, second Liberal, third Conservative, fourth Liberal, fifth NDP.
And sorry, and just to be clear, I think, may I? I think I just want to ask clarification on to my colleague, Mr. Richards, on this. Yep. This is without actually changing the number of minutes assigned. So you would have a longer, a 6-minute Liberal round following a 5-minute Conservative round in the second.
So what you're saying is the number 4 would then still be a 6-minute.
Yeah, a 6-minute Liberal slot. So we're not trying to challenge their time.
And I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Oh, that was actually my question. Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Lamoureux's going to be next. So you'd be changing that the 5-minute to a 6-minute?
I'd be comfortable with that, yeah.
Would start off then.
Correct.
Okay, so what about
we'd flip the order in both rounds, essentially.
Sure. So how would you feel in terms of if we went Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Liberal?
That's round one.
That's round one.
Yep.
And then we go Conservative, Liberal, Liberal, Conservative. NDP. It's only because that gives us four. Otherwise, we're taking a risk. We have 5 members. Right?
Well, but again, what you're then doing is taking time away from the opposition if that does happen. And I think the other concern is having a double back-to-back questions from the government. So, I think it's important that we actually would maintain the order there. It would be Conservative Liberal in the second round. But we would allow the Liberal to have a full 6-minute slot rather than a 5-minute slot at the end.
On the second round, I just don't want, because we're only having 4 of the 5 members. Every other party is going to have the opportunity to make sure that their member gets to speak, except for the Liberals. If we can get the 2 and the 3 spot, there's a better chance that at least 4 of the 5 will be afforded the opportunity to speak, right?
Of course, that would be at the expense of one of the Conservative members then, though. That's the issue here, is that you're taking time away from the opposition parties, and we'd actually be allocated less time than our seat count would indicate in that scenario, right?
But then you're getting the lead off on the second round.
Well, in the second round, yes. In the first round, I'm willing to allow the government to have that lead.
Right.
And to give more time on that fourth slot in the second round.
Mr. Christofferson.
Thanks, Chair. Well, hope springs eternal, so I haven't completely given up on trying to get me out of the 5th spot, but in the second round. But another hill I'm not going to hold my breath on. So let me just say to Mr. Lamoureux that I appreciate the fact that they're willing to discuss, but it still leaves us with the same problem. And the problem is the government getting a 12-minute run. That's the issue. It's not, I'm already in the spot where if anybody gets jettisoned, we're gone, okay? That's the results of the election. I got to live with it. But in terms of the element of fairness of everything else, and I wouldn't have a horse in this race. It's just the problem is a government, not the Liberal government, a government at a committee getting a 12-minute run. That's a huge advantage that I've never seen before. And so I think the government's got to recognize that that's the problem. And I thought, quite frankly, to be fair, I thought the official opposition made a very fair suggestion. I recognize, Mr. Lamoureux, that you're right. And we've got a lot of committees, like public accounts, of all the committees, the Premier Oversight Committee, and we had the government lead off. I don't think it's like that anywhere in the Commonwealth. So I recognize that that's to your credit, that you were willing to put that the way it should be. But to be fair, I thought for the official opposition to give up that spot to give the government some latitude to break up the 12-minute run. I thought that was pretty fair-minded, too, because they are giving up. You know yourself, when this place is packed and everybody's paying attention, first up gets the greatest attention. And for the official opposition to give that up, I thought was something. And it's still, your counter proposal, Mr. Lamoureux, still leaves us with, and I might point out that negotiations are still happening with the parliamentary secretary, not anybody else, but I would say that in fairness, the 12-minute run thing is still there, and that's the real problem. that really is a problem. I'm not aware of any other committee where a government member has ever had a 12-minute run structurally built in. Man, I'd give my political right arm to have that every meeting I started to go to. Thanks.
Still on the amendment. Just to clarify, I guess, yeah, no, we'll just carry on. Further debate on the amendment. Mr. Richards.
Well, you know, I thought for a minute there it did seem like we maybe had some willingness to try and cooperate and make this work. You know, I think in the absence of that, it seems like you know, the government here is simply making an attempt to appear to be offering something to the opposition, but actually are trying to benefit themselves. And it's unfortunate that is the case. That's, you know, that they're seeking to try to, you know, basically have, you know, more time in the committee than their seat count would indicate. And to, you know, we thought we were trying to be reasonable and offer something here that could work for everybody so that the committee would be fair and equitable. It appears the government is simply another example of the Trudeau government. Smoke and mirrors kind of a situation where they put one thing out as what they say and another thing is what they're doing. And that's really unfortunate if that's the road they're going to go down. I hope they'll reconsider and accept our reasonable offer.
Any further debate on the amendment?
That they're going to stick by demanding 12 minutes? Is that so? Here we go again. Here we go again on the easy stuff. The easy stuff. And I say that as somebody who benefited from this. I say that. And I appreciate it. 3 minutes or 3%, whatever it was. Everything's relative, eh? But I got to tell you, to demand a 12-minute, even Harper didn't demand that. Even they, who, apologies to present companies, but about the most other than it took Harper, after I left Harris experience in Queen's Park, it took till I ran into Harper to find anybody nearly as undemocratic, and they didn't try to do this. 12 minutes, that is a big, big deal. And the government just won't, here we go again, all looking down, talking to each other. They're just going to, once again, this is the way that, you know, the government wants to do things different, but what I'm telling you is you're exactly like the last government. They did exactly the same thing, made their arguments that they thought were reasonable, shut up, wouldn't say anything more, buried their heads in their books, played with their smartphones and their iPads and chatted with each other, but would not engage seriously because they'd made up their mind. And again, this is the easy stuff. What evidence is there that this government is at all serious about democratic reform? Even their preferred voting method that they're talking about now, everyone is acknowledging is skewed in their favor. So we'll see how that plays out. But here we are again at committee, the one area where the government said they were going to be more transparent, more accountability, less partisanship, and at every turn where we've tried to get them to recognize there's a little more fairness that can be brought to this very easily, nope, we've made up our mind, we've decided, that's it, we don't want to hear any more. And then they go quiet like Harper's people did, and then they'll sit there and say nothing, and we've got two choices over here. you can filibuster, which you can't filibuster everything, or we just acquiesce. And then this goes away as an issue, and for the next 4 years, we live with the government getting a 12-minute run. But let me tell you, when the government's under attack, because of the witnesses that are coming forward, having a 12-minute run to take the public away from where the last series of question and answers had them to where they want to be is a gift directly from heaven. It doesn't get any better. And trust me, that's somebody who's speaking who has a measly 3 minutes at the end of the second round that I'm going to be lucky to see. But as much as I'd like this to be about us, it isn't. It's about fairness. And again, I say to the government that a 12-minute run, when we measure these things by the minute, percentages to the decimal point are all calculated. This is a big deal in terms of how we run our committees. And I see a lot of activity over there, but I don't know whether that's the next issue they're working on, and this one's already over, or whether there's still hope that the government may decide that maybe they've let a little fairness in. Pardon me? Well, it was nice to hear you speak, though. It's nice to see you jump in. We appreciate that. It gives Mr. Lamoureux, the parliamentary secretary, a chance to get a rest from being the one that's leading all the discussions, which was another reform that they've already broken, by the way. I mean, they're racking them up pretty quick around here. Boom, 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 boom. But I got to tell you, I mean, I'm defending the opposition, but really what I'm defending is fairness. It is not fair. It is so not fair that even the Harper government didn't attempt to ram through this kind of a scenario. And now we know why they threw a few crumbs to the NDP and a couple of percentages to the official opposition. It was because they hoped that that would be enough to buy them this incredibly lucrative political gift of having the floor for 12 minutes straight with a or a series of witnesses. It's not fair. And this government said fairness would matter. When are they going to start showing it? When? When? Because they're not showing it yet. It's all talk. Talk, 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 sunny ways, talk, 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 sunny ways, change, democracy, transparency, nonpartisanship, talk, 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 talk. When it's time to do something, oh no, nope, arms crossed, no way, end of debate, we'll just wait to use our majority and shut down the pesky opposition again. That's where we are, and you know what? We just spent 10 years in that, and this government was elected with a mandate to be different. Where's the difference? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And Ms. Van den Belt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We talk about fairness, and actually, I find it interesting that it's Mr. Christofferson who has 2 chances to speak in every round, talking about those of us who one of us will not get a chance to speak because there are 5 members and there are 4 spots. But I would like to propose an amendment. I do hear, Mr. Richards, when you mentioned to me about the fact that it's possible that we may not frequently get to number 4 in the second round, and that's something that I'm not as familiar with. But I think that what we could do as to meet you halfway is if we were to reduce the number of minutes in the second round for the first 3 to 5 minutes, so that saves us 3 minutes. So we would go 5, 5, 5, 5, and 3. That makes it more likely that we would get to that 4th spot in the second round. And I think that that's only fair because I do think that it's important that we on this committee are all individuals. And sorry. It would be still, the order would stay the same, but we would be reducing. So in fact, we would be losing. And in fact, if you look at the percentages, we've actually, compared to the previous parliament, the opposition has, both opposition parties have more time to speak than under the previous. But this would be reducing our time more, but it would make it more likely that we would get to that 4th spot. So just to meet you halfway, I think that that would be fair also to individual members of this committee who want to have a chance to ask questions as individuals as well.
Mr. Richards.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I mean, appreciate the offer there, the feeling there. If the government is quite certain, and that would then make the fourth slot, come up in most meetings, then why not make the switch so that they don't have two slots in a row? If they're quite certain that that proposal will then allow the fourth slot to exist, why not make the flip so that there's not two Liberal spots in a row? That's still 11 minutes. I mean, it's a slight improvement, I suppose, but not much of one. So, I mean, make the flip then. If you're so confident that number 4 would then come up, why not make it then? Why not make it if you're so convinced that that'll change the fourth spot and give it the opportunity? I don't understand why you wouldn't then make that flip. Well, we've already made, the compromise has already been made. I mean, to give the government that length of time all in one stretch has been pointed out many times is certainly not fair. And if you're convinced that number 4 would then come up, why not make the flip? Well, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Yeah. I want to be sensitive to what Mr. Blake and David is saying. I must admit, Blake, I'm a little bit surprised that you're prepared to surrender that first line of questioning. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take advantage of that. If you're prepared to say that the government should have the first round of questions, I think we'll take that back. What about the idea of the 7 minutes? Remember, the way it worked was that it was 7 minutes at the very beginning. Are you content with the 6 minutes? So the governing party starts off with 6 or 7 minutes. It used to be 7 minutes. What's your thoughts? And then because I'd like to maybe come up with a proposal, but I just want to get your sense on the amount of time for questioning.
Well, I'm not quite certain exactly what you're asking there, Kevin. Are you indicating that you would want to change the whole first round to 7 minutes? Or are you indicating that you want just that first slot to be 7? What are you indicating?
It seems to me that your preference is to go back to the old system, and I'm open to that. But the old system led off by 7 minutes by the government, 7 minutes by the official opposition, 7 minutes by the third party, and then you would do that whole first round with 7 minutes, and then you would go to 5 minutes. Is that also your preference?
Well, no, that's not what I indicated. Let me give us a minute to consider that. But
okay.
So what you're suggesting is the whole first round would then go to 7 minutes, and the second round would become 5 minutes. Is that what you're indicating?
I'm just trying to get a sense in terms of if we come up with a proposal.
Okay.
What would be your preference? Is it 7 minutes? Strictly thinking of that first round, 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. Do you want to stay with the 6 minutes that's being proposed? I want to make sure that you're confident that you want to surrender that first line of questioning. That's a big one for me.
Give us a moment to give some thought to this,
okay.
Kevin. Okay?
Would committee members like to suspend for a couple of minutes so we could discuss this? Okay, we'll suspend for a few minutes so the parties can discuss this amongst themselves. Go to the washroom. Okay, I think we may have come to an agreement here. Some good work going on anyways. But what I'd like to do to make this clear for the minutes is to withdraw first the amendment and then the motion. So I'd ask the committee, first of all, if we could withdraw Mr. Richards' original amendment.
And I'll withdraw the original. I'll reread the motion that I think we all have consensus on.
Yeah, okay, wait. So
I think
all in
Blake
favor?
was going to have Blake.
Yeah,
We've already.
we're withdrawing that. Now I want to withdraw the original motion, and we're going to start with the new original motion. So,
For Blake to move the.
is anyone opposed to withdrawing the original motion? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe Blake, you were going to withdraw your amendment and then reintroduce a new amendment. I believe that's what was.
No, we're going to withdraw everything we started with, and we're going to just start with a new motion now.
We thought thought it might be better because it's the official opposition that is giving up that first spot, that the record would show the official opposition actually moving the amendment. That's the.
Okay,
Blake,
so yeah,
Okay.
obviously there has been some discussions, and I think everyone has agreed that we're all trying to find a way to compromise here.
Then we have withdrawn your first amendment,
I'm willing to withdraw, yeah.
and now you're going to propose a different amendment.
Sure. Based
Okay.
on the discussions that we've all had, I think all parties seem to have an agreement here that we can proceed with the following. And that is that in round one, all slots would be 7-minute slots, with the order being Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Liberal. Round two, the first 4 slots would all be 5-minute slots, and the order would be Conservative, Liberal, Conservative, Liberal, and the 5th slot would remain a 3-minute slot, and it would be an NDP slot.
Everyone understand that's what we've discussed? Any discussion on the amendment? All in favor? Carried. Do we have to go to the original motion now? Or is that the original motion? A vote on the amended motion, which is basically the same thing. All in favor? Okay. Carried.
Oh, what was the amendment and then the main motion?
Yeah.
All right, fine. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you for cooperation. I think it was some excellent work so far. That's why I came to Parliament, to have rational debate in committee and move things forward in a thoughtful way. So we go on to the next motion, which is document distribution. Ruby?
I'd like to move the next matter regarding document distribution. This motion reads that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, and only when such documents exist in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly prior to appearing before the committee.
Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Working meals. Someone want to?
In the interest of recognizing that it is lunchtime, I'll move number 7 on working meals. That the clerk of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees.
All in favor? Carried. Okay, a motion related to travel, accommodation, living expenses, or witnesses. Anyone like to make a motion on that?
I move that if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 1 representative per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Any debate? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Access to in-camera meetings.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I know that Mr. Christofferson wanted to make an amendment. Could I suggest that we move to item 11 first and dispense with it immediately, and then we can come back to your point?
Okay, we do the 2 on in-camera at the end there?
If that's acceptable to you, if it's acceptable to...
Yeah, no, I think the chair had suggested that we do it at the end. Is that what you're also reaffirming? Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
that okay
so
with...
we'll do a motion on transcripts. Oh, wait, that's in camera too. Sorry. Yeah.
So I propose that on notice of motion, that 48 hours notice be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration. That the notice of motion be filed with the clerk of the committee and distributed to members in both official languages. That 48 hours notice be calculated in the same manner as for the House. And that motions be submitted to the clerk no later than 6 p.m.
If it's okay, I'm going to ask the clerk, just administratively, they've got a little bit of an issue with the time that might make things facilitate things, so I'll let the clerk talk about her thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to flag for members that when we receive notices of motion, we do all we can to turn them around quickly and distribute them to the membership as soon as possible. With a 6 p.m. deadline, this will be very difficult to turn around and distribute to the members the same day, because at that time of day we do not have access to the services that we normally need to process a notice of motion. So it's up to the committee what it would like to adopt, but I just wanted to flag that particular difficulty with
What
the
time
6
do you
p.m.
need?
Earlier in the day would give us better access to the translation services and also to the offices of the members if we should need to call for clarification.
Earlier being what?
4 is good.
4? Mr. Christopherson.
I was curious, did we have this last time? It was a problem last time too? Is that why you're raising it, Madam Clerk?
I'm not aware, since I was not with the committee in the last session.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Friendly amendment to 4 p.m.
Amendment, 4 p.m. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
I thank the members.
For what? Members will put that on the record, that they accommodated to make administration easier and more efficient. So we'll go back to, oh, sorry.
I'll move number 9 unless you want to say something.
Okay.
Okay, access to in-camera meetings, that unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to have one staff member present from their office and one staff member from their party at in-camera meetings.
Anyone discussion on this? We'll keep your amendments there, yeah. Mr. Richards.
Or the previous?
Yeah, it's exactly the way it was last time.
But it's not in here.
Yeah,
It's not in there?
Yeah.
You don't have that? You found it? Okay, any opposed? Carried. Okay, transcripts of in-camera meetings. Anyone want to move that?
I'll move the transcript of in-camera meetings, that one copy of the transcript for each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee.
Any discussion? Ready for the vote? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And so we're going to now go to, just before we go to Mr. Christopherson, I want to make 2 points. First of all is, once again, thank you for a very thoughtful and productive session. I think that's what people of Canada are looking for in their parliament. At least I heard that at the doors. So thank you very much, everyone, for thoughtful discussion of the points. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to mention for the next meeting, which is Thursday already, and maybe we can discuss this after Mr. Christopherson's motion here. We have a letter which I think you all should have received from the House Leader. The committee's our highest priority is business, and so it might be timely to have the government leader accept his offer to appear before committee, but we'll discuss that after Mr. Christopherson's motion. David, the floor is yours.
You know what? In fairness, Chair, I can't imagine that I would be anywhere near done in 5 minutes. If you wanted to move ahead to that one order of business as it speaks to the next meeting, especially if it involves inviting someone, I'd be willing to do that. Again, as long as I can get my motion right after, and that you recognize we're not yet done all our rules until my motion is dealt with one way or another.
Okay.
It's up to you. I'll go for if you want.
Yeah, and if we don't, if we didn't finish the debate on your motion, we could do that the next meeting as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my thinking.
So let's
Was the government looking to invite the government house leader to the next meeting? To the next meeting. So we really should do that first, or you're not going to get to it when I get the floor.
Well, the committee. Okay, would the committee like to invite the government leader, based on the letter that you all received, to the next meeting? Yeah, would anyone like to move a motion from any party?
I so move.
I second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
This is to appear on Thursday.
Any opposed? Yes, to appear on Thursday. Okay, Mr. Christopherson, please, and if we don't finish your motion today, we will.
Just to be clear, because I won't, we've got a few minutes. It takes me that long to clear my throat. Would we bring in the government house leader and do all of that, then return to me, or were you looking at finishing my motion and then hearing from the witness? And because I got a fair bit to say, so I don't want to disrupt an otherwise productive meeting because of rules.
If we could have the house leader.
That's why I'm offering it. That's kind of what my sense is, because I got something to say on this, and it's from where I come from, it's important, and but I don't want to hold up the business of the committee. So, for what it's worth, Chair, I leave with you that I'm quite prepared actually to even adjourn this, have our witness tomorrow, and then upon conclusion of our business with the witness, on Thursday, if you direct that I will be then given a chance to place my motion and it gets its full hearing, I'm fine with that, sir. Yeah. That's probably a good way to go. And
this will be a notice.
As long as I have a notice of motion with the assurance that it comes up right after we hear from the government house leader. If that's your ruling, I'm fine, sir, Chair.
Mr. Graham?
Just a very quick question for the Chair. Just for clarification, have the 12 rules that we've passed here, do they apply for the next meeting or not until after the motion is dealt with?
They all apply immediately. They were passed. Okay, so the understanding in our friendly group here is that the next meeting we will have the government leader, and then we will do government house leader, and then do Mr. Christopherson's motion. Yeah, so as everyone understands that. And did you want to submit?
Circulated already in both languages, Chair.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's right here.
The clerk did, rather. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
It's in front of everyone.
Perfect. Is there any further business in the 2 minutes we have left? Mr. Richards.
Obviously, further to the motion we passed at the beginning of the meeting about the committee, tabling of the committee reports, when would your intention be to table that report to the House?
As soon as we can have it ready, because we want the committees to get started, right?
Do we have an estimate of when that might be?
I asked the clerk to respond officially to that.
We will prepare the report as quickly as possible as soon as we have all the information that we need.
So are you talking about the report with all the names, or just the fact we're letting the whips go ahead? The report with the names? Yeah. So the parties have to, whenever the parties have submitted all their names, then we can do it as quickly as possible.
Okay. Now, do you have to first table the fact that we're allowing the whips to do so, or
no?
Or does that report have to be tabled?
No, not that. Not the permission. Just the big report with all the names.
Names. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Thanks.
I would like to ask clarification. Does that motion have to be unanimous in the House?
Which one?
To support the one where we're reporting back what the whips are proposing for all the committees?
It's been the practice that the chair.
So the practice is that the chair presents that report and asks the House to adopt that report. Okay, any further business? We're right on time. Very productive meeting.
Sorry, is it possible for the clerks and the analysts to have name tags as well in future meetings?
Could you have name tags for clerk and the analyst? Good. Good point. I think we can arrange that. Okay, thank you all. Meeting adjourned.